You are listening to Agri Culture, a podcast that aims to explore the stories of the people that make up our agricultural industry and culture of farming in Scotland and beyond. On today's episode,
one very simplistic way of looking at it is one of our key drivers is no longer yield, it's profit, as well as the holistic nature and biodiversity benefits that you get from this approach.
One thing that we say is that we're trying to farm in harmony with nature rather than against her. So planning our grazing plan and all around sort of either the capacity of the soils, the type of ground that they're on, but also the shelter that they've got.
Working in harmony with nature, having a herd which is actively succeeding outside. We want to be carving outside, which is a long-term goal. I want to see more biodiversity through the estate. I want to see, in an ideal world, perfect infrastructure so you can maximise your moves.
I'm Mary-Jane Lawrie, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Bertie Troughton, Hugh Chamerlain and McDonald of Atholl Estates. They join us to talk about how in recent years they have started to move towards regenerative farming practices, a big shift in focus for the farms and the staff who work there. They share what has worked well for them, balancing agricultural productivity with biodiversity and sustainability goals. It's clear that community resilience is important to them, as they refer to the longer-term initiatives such as peatland restoration and woodland planting, in hand with shorter-term wins such as sward diversity and enjoying the flora and fauna now found on Atholl Estates. Hi, Bertie, Hugh and Laura. Thanks for joining us today. Because we've got three of you on the podcast, I thought it'd be useful to start by everyone introducing themselves. So Bertie, can we start with you? Can you introduce yourself and your job role, please?
Hi, Mary-Jane. I'm Bertie Troughton. I am the resident trustee of Atholl Estates. So that means I'm trustee of some of the estate, which is owned by a charity, and I'm one of the three owners of the private bits of the estate.
Perfect. And Hugh?
Hi, Mary-Jane. My name's Hugh Chamerlain. I've been the farm manager for Atholl Estates for 7 years now. I'm in charge of the trust, as Bertie spoke about there, Blair Castle Estate Trust, the home farm, or one of the home farms. Yeah, that's me.
And Laura?
Hi, Mary-Jane. I'm Laura. I'm head of rural here at Atholl. So I'm a rural chartered surveyor and look after sort of anything land based across the estate.
Fantastic. And Bertie, since your sort of role is the sort of one of the trustees, I thought it might be good to come to you for you to describe us what is the business, what makes up Atholl Estates?
Well, it's a big business. We employ about 70 people full-time and then another 70 seasonally. The business is tourism. So there's Blair Castle, which is open to the public. We have a caravan park. We have hydropower. We have a forestry operation. We have a holiday accommodation business. We have some industrial estates. We have some housing, which is all kind of for local employed people on the whole, or retirees. And then we have our farming operations, which is what we're here to talk about today. So there's the main home farm up at the castle, and then we have another regenerative farm down in Ballinloig, which is owned by my sister, and then a number of tenant farms across the estate.
Perfect. So as you say, we're here today to talk about the farming side of the business. So we'll get into the nitty-gritty of that in a minute or two. But I thought for listeners to the podcast who have maybe never been to the estate, how would you each describe the estate and what makes it unique? We'll start with you, Laura.
Well, it's a large estate, so we're about 120,000 acres in total, split into sort of different geographical areas. It's a beautiful place to live and work. I've been here for just over 2 years now, so there's bits of the estate that I haven't got to yet, but every part has sort of a story to tell. And we're a bit of a mushroom shape, so there's a significant proportion at the north of the estate that's within the Cairngorms National Park, so that has an influence over how we do some things to the north. And then the most southern part of the estate is down at Dunkeld, at the kind of further down the A9.
And Hugh, what makes the estate unique for you?
I think it's the scale, location, and the people within it as well. It's obviously it's a big estate within Scotland. Location-wise, we're on the bottom of the Cairngorms. We're currently sat here talking whilst it's -12 outside with a foot of snow at my back door. So it has its challenges there, which makes it what it is. I've lived up and down the country from Oxfordshire to Galashiels to here, and this is a challenging place, which makes it fantastic to be here because it makes you get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all need a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And for you, Bertie, being one of the trustees, you must feel sort of a level of responsibility towards the estate as well. What is it that makes the estate unique for you?
Well, it's my home, so I love it. I love the hills, love the people, love the humour, and I, like Hugh, have spent a few years living in different parts of the world, and it's extremely nice to be back here, back at home. So, yeah, home is where the heart is, I think.
Absolutely. And Laura and Hugh, you both described the sort of landscape a bit there. So, yeah, getting to some quite steep areas and some maybe more challenging parts of the estate that are maybe less conducive to, I'm going to say productive in inverted commas, productive farming. So, when did the idea of moving towards sort of regenerative and sustainable farming first come onto the estate's radar?
I think it was spoken about on the sister farm owned by Bertie's sister 4 or 5 years ago, and Bertie came to me. I think it was probably 3.5 years ago, and said, What do we reckon?" And we did a huge amount of research into it and got our teeth into it. We visited Groundswell, the Regen conference down in south of England, and that was a huge eye opener for me. That for me is when we decided it was the right direction to go. And I think Bertie's influence has been a fantastic input for me because it's being led from the top. So that's where the spark comes from.
And for you then, Bertie, what inspired you personally to make that shift towards regen? I know Hugh said there it was your sister's farm that maybe inspired you a little. What was it that they were doing, and what was it that inspired you to make the change?
Well, a long time ago, when I was at university at Cambridge, the Cherry family, who farm down there and run Groundswell, their kids are good friends of mine, and they occasionally would have me over for Sunday lunch. And bit by bit, they informed me. I mean, they're more of an arable farm down there, but they were learning a lot of, min-till tricks from Australia and New Zealand, and they were the early kind of pioneers of regenerative farming in the UK, and that led them to then hosting this Groundswell conference. And I think my sister and I were very impressed by them and what they were doing, and we were intrigued to know how you could take that sort of regenerative mentality into a upland highland farm. And it was through the likes of Caroline Grinrod and Rob Harvard and people like that we started to either speak to or read their material, that inspired us to go down that journey. And my sister's farm at Tully Met, when my mother handed it to her, there was a moment when she was faced with the traditional way forward of, she had pretty knackered infrastructure. There was reinvestment. There was the option of reinvesting in sheds and machinery for a farm that wasn't really making much profit, or there was another way of doing things. And I think one side of regenerative farming, which isn't so quantitative, but is very compelling, is that if you farm in a regenerative way, you're farming in a nice place to live. There's more biodiversity, there's more grass around. You're not putting so many inputs into the ground, and it feels more natural. So you're not surrounded by, well, right now we're surrounded by snow, but come March, we'll hopefully be surrounded by grass rather than sort of muddy, bare fields. So there's we've always been interested in having very healthy animals on the farm. Before the regenerative move anyway, it was always a key KPI to us. But starting to think about healthy soils was, I think, the thing that turned the switch in my brain. And then, as Hugh said, going down to Groundswell with Hugh and Laura and realizing that, we weren't nutters. There were plenty of people doing this and have been doing it for years. And
Plenty
they
of
were
other
very
nutters
good
out
at
there.
it. There are plenty of nutters out there, but it was also fun.
Yeah.
It's a nice collaborative kind of environment, the regen world, and organizations like Pasture for Life as well have been really informative and helpful to us. So there wasn't one light bulb moment, but I would credit the Cherry family a lot. Caroline Grinrod, Pasture for Life, and then Hugh and Laura for being up for the challenge and running with the ball.
Yeah, and as you were saying, the landscape down at Groundswell, very, very different to the landscape that you're dealing with on Atholl Estates, obviously miles and miles apart, but different soils, different climate. You've got your own challenges there. So for Hugh, you were there before the shift to regenerative farming. So practically speaking, from the farm manager's role, what were your first steps on the ground as you started to think about moving towards regen agriculture?
I think the first steps are just being brave enough to go for it. I think Bertie will back me up with that one. It's jumping in 2 feet first and going for it. So on a practical sense, the farming calendar is a long one. You've got the calving cycle, the lambing cycle. We didn't go out and buy new livestock to fit our system. We are transitioning our livestock to a regenerative system. And luckily for us, that it is working very well. Our cows and our sheep are both doing a very good job. We've removed huge amounts of input, as Bertie said. We've come away from fertilizers and sprays and inputs such as feeds. We used to grow 30 acres of barley. We used to buy in 35 ton of concentrates for the ewes. We used to buy in around 35 ton of concentrates for calves. We don't do any pit silage anymore. And I think getting a plan of where you want to be in 5 years, is a good start. If you want to set yourself some little goals of, let's do some bale grazing here for this year, see how the cows react. Let's try and outwinter a bit longer, and if you're in the housing situation, so we set ourselves little personal KPIs within the business of which we're achieving, and we are now within 3 years, nearly 4 years, we are now outwintering all of our cattle up until a week before calving. The sheep don't receive any concentrates apart from a ton of lick buckets for energy when the weather's like this, and the cows receive a bolus and a fluke drench if they need it, according to vet results. But so we have completely changed how we're farming. But the first step, I think, is just being brave enough to try that first step, be it the bale grazing, be it, say, the housing. That to me was the big thing, and having faith in your livestock and your ground that you can do that. One thing we do speak about is every farm is different, and we are different from our sister farm down at Balhallen at Tullymet, and we're only 15 miles apart. Every farm is different, so you have to build your model around your farm and the current livestock. I've spoken to numerous people over the years who have said to me, you've got to be very careful in the transition that you don't do something silly and say sell all your cows and buy something completely different, because financially it might not work for your model. We are a livestock production farm here. We are a very good store producing farm. We produce very good store cattle and store lambs. But given our growing period and the inclement weather we can get, you've got to be very, very, plan led to make sure what you're doing is the right direction. But little steps at a time, but being brave with the little steps, I think, is probably key. I think.
I think moving from having cattle housed over winter, a lot of traditional Scottish farmers will house their cattle for, nearly 6 months, which is obviously quite labour intensive, expensive. You've got the shed upkeep, you've got the straw to buy for bedding if they're on straw bedded courts. That's quite a big shift. How do you find that the land has held up to that as well? Because presumably you've got to have the right sort of land that doesn't turn to a bog as soon as you have rain.
So a bit of a backstory. Historically, we used to house start of November, basically. Cows and calves used to come in. Calves used to go through the shed on a TMR. Cows would come in on bale silage and generally be in from the start of November right through calving, which some cows could be inside till June if they were second, third cycle calving. We now cows come home for weaning, and they're housed for about a week, 10 days at weaning. We do a premium cattle health scheme blood test, so we wait for the results to come back from those, and then the cows are turned away. We put all the cows into one mob, so we're currently running 110 cows in one mob, and then there's 30 heifers in another mob in another system being looked after separately. But yes, having the right ground does help. But there's a lot of people who will say, "Oh, well, I can't farm gently on my ground because it's really wet or it's really clay or this." Building that farming model around your ground, like I've said, every farm is different. For us, luckily, we have a lovely big parkland in below the castle, which is basically a riverbed. We outwintered 120 cows in there last year in a very wet winter, and with the minimal reinstatement, we got that back and re-drilled to grass come the end of April. So it is very much making the system work for you. I'm a strong believer in making the farm work for you, not you work for the farm, and building that system with what you've got is very much key.
You mentioned earlier as well moving away from making silage in a pit to you've talked there about bale grazing. Has that been something that's been a success for you? And I'm for anyone listening, what do you mean by bale grazing? Is that where you roll the bales out in the field for the cattle to feed off over the winter so they've got enough food stuff? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, there's two types of bale grazing, and again, historically, we used to do about 90 hectares of pit silage for the young stock through the pit through the TMR, and also for the cows when they came in. We wanted to come away from that because we can't move pit silage around the farm when the cows are out the farm very easily. So we we've tried bale grazing where we lay bales out and roll them down the field. Where you've got a set number of animals in a field or a location, you're moving a electric fence with the bales as you unroll them. So it's like strip grazing bales, I think is the best way to describe it for someone who doesn't quite get the picture. We did that for 2 years, but what we find is we were getting a lot of matted organic matter being left, which is fine because a lot of people turn to me and say that's waste. You're wasting all that good hay, rolling it down the field. Well, we're not, because we're adding organic matter back to the ground. We're getting a lot of poaching from the cows, pushing that organic matter into the soils. But we have a Hustler bale unwinder, which we use on the back of the tractor. And with the big mobs, we're currently putting one bale per 25 cows. And so the cows are in a large area, which we're looking to target with increased organic matter, animal impact to improve our soils and our drainage. So we go in with the bale unwinder, and they're currently getting 4 or 5 bales depending on the weather. And we basically unwind those bales down the field. Each row is about 100 meters long, so there's loads of room for the cattle to come in, nice and clean on fresh ground every day, so they're not eating off old hay. But we used to make about 1,500 bales of silage or hay as well. But this year we've made only 1,500 bales and no pit silage, and we can find that's actually supporting what we're doing. We've transitioned the sale of the calves slightly differently, but we can come on to that later. But we're also looking to reduce our plastic usage considerably. So we used to wrap about over 1,000 bales, and this year we only wrapped about 500. So we had a lovely summer, be it what we did bale, there wasn't a lot of, because we baled a lot of hectares for not a lot of reward, given the growing season. But we managed to make a lot of hay this year, which is fantastic, and it's feeding really well. So that's one way we sort of transitioned away from plastics and pushing organic matter back into our ground, basically.
Yeah, I think if we could guarantee a summer like we had in 2025, we'd all be happy, wouldn't we? Because that's, when people making hay, it's a dream. It's made in a couple of days rather than trying to, catch good weather between rains. So I think, last year was a particularly good year. As you say, maybe lower yields than you would have liked, but possibly better quality and, reduced plastic use. So that's great. I'm just sticking with sort of the farming chat then. What regen methods have been the most impactful for you, Hugh, from, as a farm manager's point of view? What have you seen the biggest changes from?
I think quantity of grass, and I also think quality of livestock. On the farm, we've had a shepherd and a stockman who've both been here for over 40 years. And it was a very difficult change for them coming in, because it's a new aspect, it's all new learning, but showing a few examples of the resilience that regen can bring to you is fantastic. One example was we had that really hot spell 3 years ago, and we deferred some grazing, which was just basically shutting the gate and allowing the grass to grow long for winter forage. And there was a really strong drought. All the heavily grazed grass, which was still set stock grazed, I went in there with George and Gordon and said, right, have a look at this. And we lifted up the grass, shoved our hand to the bottom of it, and it was damp, it was moist, and it was 27 degrees. The surface temperature in that ground was considerably lower than it was on the paddocks out and about, which had no grass on because it had been burnt off. So resilience is a big thing, and building that through systems such as that is key. Quantity of grass. With the change of the grazing patterns, we now move big mobs quickly rather than set stocking. So historically, we would have groups of 25, 30 cows in a set area from turnout at calving until housing at winter. Now we have bulling groups of 60, 70 cows, moving over larger areas quicker. So we're gaining a huge more winter forage coming. That's why we're able to keep cows out longer, is because, and we don't buffer feed now. We used to buffer feed in October. We now don't buffer feed until mid to end of November, because we've got quantity of grass in front of us. But also not animal health, the wrong word, but animal condition, I think is the word. When we outwintered for the first time, there was obviously nervousness about that. We were unsure what the cows were going to come back in like. We were unsure how they would actually react to being out all winter. But when they came back in for calving, they were absolutely fantastic, Nick. We had a small group of cows who we kept in over winter, which were a select group we'd pulled out because we knew they weren't going to winter very well. And the cows that had been outside had actually came in looking much better and had better body condition scores than the cows that had been inside. So I think for me, certainly quantity of grass at the times of year when you need it, e.g. at drought in the summer, which we seem to be seeing more often, but also when we're a foot deep in snow, we've actually got a good cover of ground there protecting our soils. They're also key. So for me, they're the two drivers I've noticed in the last 3 years.
Yeah, I think one of the key differences in outcomes is that there's more grass around, but that's made achievable by this idea of rotating the cattle more frequently. And it's not like down in a small farm in Devon where you might be moving them twice a day. We don't have that much sunshine and rain and grass growth, but we are moving them around more. But that's only, I guess, the challenge. Because initially I was like, well, Hugh, why can't we just do it tomorrow? But the challenge was that we needed the water infrastructure in, if you're doing these dividing up the fields with electric fencing. So you're doing kind of what Gabe Brown is been talking about for years, all this paddock division stuff. We needed to invest quite a lot of money into the water infrastructure so that when you divide a field into 4 or 6, that you can still get water to where the cows are. And yeah, Laura's led on that program, which has been very very beneficial.
I guess for you, Laura, the logistics of trying to plan out how livestock are going to move around and fit in with all the other practices of the estate must have been quite tricky.
Yeah, I think so. We used to, Caroline Grundrod, her business is Roots of Nature. So she came on as a consultant. And I think in the early days before I joined, there were some very detailed grazing plans where we would look at the year ahead and we would work out the amount of available forage, exactly how many days rests we needed. A lot of time and energy went into that, but actually the reality of the farming year was that the weather would change and you had to make decisions that then sort of blew that very detailed plan out into the open. So I think we've, for everybody's sanity, have sort of scaled that back a little to the extent that there's always a plan, but it's perhaps less sort of day by day and more per group and slightly longer periods, so that there is that flexibility if there's other events around the estate that we need to move around, and we're not sort of a ring fence holding. Hugh often says we've got a railway line, the A9 river, there's different sort of obstacles in the way as well that just mean that we have to be quite reactive. So yeah, that needs a bit of thought, and I think the emphasis in terms of kind of investment has gone into how we look at the management of the herd that we've got. I think it's fair to say, Hugh, that we had a slightly harsher cull of animals that we felt weren't as well suited to the regen system, and went through a slightly different process with the replacements that we were keeping. You'd be better to speak to the detail on that. So there was a cost associated with that element, and also the as you said, the fencing and water infrastructure, as opposed to looking more so at silage pits and sheds. It was more looking at investment in the animals and in the land, which is a nice place to be, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hugh, what sort of traits were you selecting for then when you were trying to rationalise your herd into something that would cope with the new policies?
So since I arrived 7 years ago, we were pushing Angus genetics through sires back into our commercial herd of predominantly Simi and Solaire bred cows. Initially, we targeted them because of the Angus premium, but also we were seeing fantastic breed traits coming through from them in those days. But with the outwintering, we've changed tack of what type of Angus bulls we've been buying for more compact animals. Our cow size is currently at about 720 kilos. I'd still like to drop that by a few more kilos. But for me, it's having an animal on the ground who can do the job. It's Rob Harvard once said it's very easy to bankrupt yourself by going and saying that's no good, that's no good, that's no good, because it looked at you wrong one day. When actually, if you've got an animal who is able to be outwintered, producing a calf every year, calf by herself, no foot problems, and you want that grey cow, you want that cow who's just blends in. You always have the cows who stand out. Oh, isn't she a good cow? And you've got the cows at the bottom. Oh, she's a bit thin or she's a bit lame. But for me, you just want to build that herd of all grey cows, the ones that you don't see because they're just getting on with the job. And it's very easy for us to be able to say we don't want any Simi cows in the herd. But actually, if that Simi cow's doing her job, we are still a business here. We are still a profitable enterprise. We're looking to build that herd, but also continue to be a profitable enterprise. And so we're looking more at the native Aberdeen Angus genetics. We've got our own small herd of native Angus on collars who run on some higher ground in Glenfender. So we're using those to produce bulls, which we can then do a crossing program back with our current cows to produce a slightly smaller cow who will outwinter, a bit more hardy, she's not as big, so big cows take feeding, and then also big cow will lose condition a lot quicker than a smaller cow outside. And then from that smaller cow, we then put our slightly more commercialized bull back to them, be it New Zealand genetics or we target breeders who are doing similar to we are, and then to produce our bread and butter, which is good quality store cattle, we then put those bulls back to our different bred cow. So again, the farming cycle is a long cycle. You can't just click your fingers and all of a sudden you've got a whole black herd of half native Angus cows out there. But we're getting there. First time last year was all our replacements were Angus sires. We managed to keep that, which is good, and it'll be the same for this year when we go through our replacements next week. So for me, we are leaning on Angus genetics for the outwintering ability, and we haven't touched on sheep, but sheep are we have 800 ewes on the farm as well, and we sold a lot of sheep 3 years ago, and we've kept a black ewe because we feel the black ewe can do what we wanted to do with little to no input on a regen system. The famous saying, they can survive on a bucket of water and a view. That's the animal we need. And we need that ewe to be able to go out, have a lamb with no difficulties, and just do all the jobs we want to do from minimal input regards to feeding costs. But this isn't to say, when we mention about reducing inputs, Bertie rightly said animal welfare and animal health is up there. It's our key driver. We are trying to produce animals which are healthy in a regen system. We are producing animals which are healthy in a regen system, should I say. So when it comes to welfare, we're not looking to not worm. It's a very similar to an organic system where we're fetal egg counting and monitoring more than maybe a conventional system. The ewes are still getting bales of hay rolled out for them now because there's a foot of snow outside out the window. So yeah, we're very much looking at the animal who will just get on and survive and do her job in the harshest of environments.
I think that's a refreshing perspective, because we can all get caught up in trying to breed the best or have the best and be in the top 25%, on paper performers. One of my old bosses always said to me, in terms of business, you want to be in the middle. So you're not standing out for good reasons and you're not standing out for bad reasons. You're just doing a good, steady job. And it sounds like the same for your livestock. You just need them to do a good, steady job, and you're working with what you've got, which financially obviously is important.
I think it's building that grounding, that foundation from the bottom. You need to start with that platform before you can rise to the top. I am always endeavor to be at the best of what we can do. We've just taken on another farm which we're stocking with pedigree Aberdeen Angus, and a part of that is, as long with the regenerative farming, is to be able to produce animals that we can sell to other people that we know will go out and perform in the harshest of conditions on a regen system. It is one of the goals, and it's the same with the commercial herd here at BCL. We want to be able to sell animals to others that we know can go on and do what we want. So getting that platform is I think you're absolutely right. We need that grey cow, but we also strive to be the best in regenerative. We strive to have the best animals which are performing in our environment to show off to others.
Yeah. And Laura, Hugh briefly touched on earlier with his anecdote about lifting the grass up in a dry summer and feeling the moisture in the soil. How important is the soil health to what you're trying to do on the estate?
Hugely important. Yeah, I think that having the healthy soils is one of the kind of backstones of why the system works. That's the driver for the grazing plan and how we manage the farm. We do regular soil testing to inform any kind of inputs that we need, which are generally just limited to lime, and possibly, would we ever put calcium inputs in, Hugh? Yeah. So yeah, we have a regular program of soil testing to check on our sort of key indicators in that sense. And the soil health and the reduction in sort of fertilizers or elimination of any fertilizers and sprays all ties nicely into the wider conservation work that the estate does. We've done some peatland restoration on the hill, for example. So it's nice to see this sort of holistic management all coming together for the better of the land and the people and the animals that are benefiting from it.
And we'll come back to some of those biodiversity projects that you just briefly touched on there. But did you take any sort of baseline measurements of what the biodiversity was like before you began? Were any surveys done or anything to see what you were starting with?
Well, around the time that we transitioned to the regen system, we entered into an EECS scheme. So as part of that application process, there was a number of surveys done, and we also worked alongside the National Park. The Cairngorms National Park Authority provided some funding through their Future Farming Fund towards some baseline surveys as well across the farm. So that's been really valuable data to give us that baselining. And also internally, we have a ranger team on the estate, so they are key in terms of tracking we get a lot of visitors onto the farm who want to come and look at specific bird species or butterfly species, so we capture all of that information. And we use apps across the farm, like Soil Mentor is one that we use, where you can track sort of movements between fields and the flora and fauna that you're seeing. And I know Hugh uses the Merlin app quite a lot as well for bird ID. So yeah, a mixture of kind of more formal baselining, which we did have in place at the start, and then trying to keep that up to date with kind of annual tracking with our own internal systems as well.
I think that's really valuable, and that's one of my biggest regrets on our farm at home is we went into an SRDP and then an EAT scheme, and we at that time SRDP didn't require any photographs or anything of the befores, if you like, and it's sad now to think that we have no record of how much improvement we've made or what the benefits have been. So it's great, and technology, as you say, really helps with that nowadays. These fantastic apps like the Merlin one and Plant ID ones mean that most people have got the information in their pocket to be able to go and identify stuff and map things and record anything interesting or new that you might see. Which biodiversity projects would you say have been your favourite or have had the biggest impact on the estate so far?
I suppose wider kind of conservation activities. I mentioned the peatland restoration briefly before. That's a huge sort of project in itself that I work with closely with our stalking teams out on the hill ground with that. And Bertie will speak to woodland creation projects and other elements that we've done, which are all fascinating. I suppose thinking more so about the farming for a second, we've just recently, again, through that future farming scheme that I mentioned before that we've worked with the park on, they've provided some funding towards some new water infrastructure through an area of land that we refer to it as the West Drive, which had previously been the home of hosting our annual horse trials for 35 years. And the horse trials has come to an end, and we're now starting to graze cattle through that land again, which hasn't seen cows in its rotation for all those years. And the water infrastructure, as Hugh was explaining before, was key to being able to do that. So again, we've used kind of, the park has put some bioacoustic monitoring out as part of that process. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how the kind of very intensive management through the horse trials that we'd had previously, how that's now going to compare to the changes in management going forward in such a kind of visible area of the estate is going to be really fascinating.
And for you, Bertie, what have been your favourite biodiversity projects recently?
Favourite's a funny word because quite a lot of them involve quite a lot of financial stress. But I'm hopeful when I think about it in sort of 20 or 30 years' time, because all of these nature projects take so long to come to fruition. But over the last 5 years, we've planted across the estate 2 million native broadleaf trees across 4 different sites. So essentially created 4 new forests, which is extremely exciting. And the ones that are, but the first sort of 5 to 10 years of a new forest is very kind of nerve-wracking because you might get a deer in, a deer might get through the fence line and demolish it. You might have some sort of new horrible tree disease that will come and wipe it out. But I'm very excited about the new woodlands, and we're also planting a lot of trees within the farm. So I hope that in 10 or 20 years' time, we might be able to be looking at doing more agroforestry, kind of basically cows grazing amongst trees, which we're looking at in suitable patches already. The peatland restoration project is visually extremely dull, really. but it's extremely beneficial in terms of flood mitigation and the storage of the carbon within the peat. So when looked at from a sort of taking a step back, and you kind of appreciate the benefits of it, although they're not visual, they are really, really rewarding to think that you might be mitigating floods and helping, bird life and the capture of carbon within the hill. So I've enjoyed the tree planting, the peatland restoration, but more day to day is really the move of the farm to this regenerative system where you've just got a lot more diversity in the fields in terms of the sward and more growth. And therefore, I think we've all noticed just a lot more bugs and bees and birds and life around the place. And that's really pleasing because, we talked about the importance of soil testing, and you can waste an enormous amount of time, and it is expensive if you overdo it on all the testing. But you can also just tell, as you said, from your walking around your own farm, Mary-Jane, you just see it and you can feel it if you live somewhere. And that's been really nice to see the would you agree, Hugh, that just a much more life about the place in the last 3-4 years?
Again, I've been here for 7 years, and we've been farming regeneratively for 3. And there's two things that stand out as sort of key moments driving round. Was we had a farm tour which we took up on into Glenfender to the wildflower meadow, and we got out, and I could just hear this drone in the background, and there was 30 people with me, and I just said, "Shh, just quiet," and everyone stood and just listened, and there was just this background humming noise. And it was all the bumblebees and all the honeybees working their way across this heather hill with all the different flora and fauna sticking up. It was just an absolute patchwork of colour. It just looked like a painter's board of yellows and pinks and reds and purples. And just hearing this noise, that was a big light bulb moment of actually we're achieving something here. And that was only in the start of year 2. And another moment was we were moving cows. I've got a video of this on my Instagram. We were moving cows through a field, and they were quite near the riverbank. And I dropped the fence, let the cows through, and all of a sudden there must have been. It felt like a million San Martins, swallows, swifts all appeared out of nowhere and were following the cows as they walked through this long grass. And they were there picking all the bugs that were being kicked up by the cows out of the long grass. And I'd never seen that before. And I was thinking, yeah, there's obviously a big change has happened there. And again, that was 2 years ago. But for me, it's how you walk across a field. Everyone can feel a compacted field when they walk across it. It feels like walking on concrete, which I don't like doing. But now, when you walk across a lot of our fields, we're starting to see that the change in the soil structure with the long grass, and you see so much more. Laura mentioned the Merlin app. So if I ever stop to move an electric fence, my phone case has got a magnet on the back, so I just turn the Merlin app on, stick it on the bonnet of the pickup, and just leave it running for 20 minutes while I move an electric fence. Come back, have a look, and it's that smile on your face when you see a new bird you've not seen, or you go through your CCAP and you're looking at the different plants, taking photographs of different plants you've never seen before, and then you get a notification to say you found a new species you've not seen. And this year particularly, we were well up in the 20s of new species of plants that haven't been seen, and that's just me pottering about. That's not a student out doing a survey for university or a professional. That is just a farmer pottering about with his iPhone, taking some pictures of some plants sticking out around his ankles. So yes, it is. We speak about rewarding as a farmer. I get great pleasure from seeing a cow calve and a calf grow on really well and become a saleable product. But actually, my change in what pleases me now as a farmer is seeing long grass growth with all the biodiversity happening and that change with it.
I think that's, you've painted a lovely picture there of the very quick short-term changes that have happened in a short amount of time. And Bertie, you touched on the sort of financial pain of some of the bigger investments for biodiversity. So it must be nice to have short, quick wins, like improving soil structure and the mix of species in your sward. Within years you're seeing a huge impact. And Bertie, for you, I guess, thinking about the sort of owner trustee position that you've got a legacy there for future generations, that you're investing presumably quite heavily in all the woodland planting and the peatland restoration, which, as you say, the peatland restoration maybe not visibly very exciting, but the woodlands are something that are going to be there for generations. And it's nice to have short-term wins, but also these long-term wins as well. It means that everything that you're doing is building on that bigger biodiversity goal.
Yeah, but I mean, we've only just started. So I think if we listen to this recording in 5 years' time, we might think, oh gosh, how naive we were. I think it's still so important that we continue to go to groundswell, speak to our friends in Pasture for Life, keep listening to other farms that are on this journey, because we're just, in the big scheme of things, one small farm trying a few tricks that we're learning from other people. But there's I think we've got to continue to get out there and learn. And Mary-Jane, I've been interested to know, is this sort of farming that we're doing, like upland regenerative farming, kind of take on mob grazing and long grass and rotations, is this something that's now taught in colleges, or is it still considered a bit sort of niche?
I think it's definitely becoming widely accepted that there are different ways of doing things. And I think for the last generation of farming, it's all been about intensification and productivity, and looking at productivity, as Hugh was saying there, as a live calf on the ground that you've then reared up, not necessarily focusing on biodiversity productivity. And there's a definite shift in attitudes now with students coming in questioning, well, why is it done that way? Focusing on numbers of livestock on the ground or yield rather than a more holistic approach. And I think with organisations like Pasture for Life and even through the Farm Advisory Service, we're getting the message out there that there are multiple ways of doing things, and no one is right or wrong. But it's, as you were saying, in 5 years' time, you might look back and think, gosh, what were we doing back then? We've changed this or that. I think it's about teaching that attitude of being flexible and adaptive, because we're all living in a time where climatic extremes are much more common. We're talking about the snow that you guys have got this now, and the droughty summer that we had, potentially following wet winters. I think it's everyone is now talking and thinking about being sustainable and able to cope with any sort of dramas that might come your way. And I think for that, it's having a holistic view and valuing each part of your farming enterprise to make sure that they all work together.
But Mary-Jane, I don't want to lead you down the wrong path, because we do still care about profit. So
of course,
that is still a major driver for us. But I would say we're just not chasing. In one very simplistic way of looking at it is, one of our key drivers is no longer yield; it's profit, as well as the holistic nature and biodiversity benefits that you get from this approach.
Yeah, and I think if you went into a pub, most farmers will be talking about their yield, because that is potentially an impressive figure. But what's more impressive is what their profit was from that yield. They might have got the highest yield in the UK, but how much money did they put into getting that high yield, and how many resources have they put in? Whereas potentially in a regenerative system, a much lower yield, but it's cost them half. There are, as you say, profit is ultimately incredibly important to any farming business on any scale. We're talking about a state level scale here, but crofters, small farmers, small family farms, none of them would exist if there wasn't any profit. So absolutely, that's important. And I think it's maybe the overall overriding factor that people need to think about is what they're doing profitable. But at the end of the day, sustainability is about environmental sustainability and social sustainability as well. So I think, yeah, it's as you say, profit is key, but not the main factor to think about in a business.
Mary-Jane, we speak about education. Last year we hosted a number of farm walks here, which we do quite regularly. One for Farm Strong. We had 30 farmers who came in, an event organised by Farm Strong, but very much listening to the regen message that they were given, but also the Cairngorms National Park. We hosted them and had nearly 40 farmers here, took them around in tour trailers, and we're explaining what we're doing. And it is amazing with that little bit of exposure to the regenerative message, and what we're doing is we are farming in a regenerative manner at scale, which I think is sometimes gets overlooked. The regen message can often be it can only be for smallholders or crofters, and it can't be for big farms or big estates. But I think I had a beef society come over from Ireland 2 years ago, and they couldn't believe what we were doing, and it was unheard of some of the methods that we were trying. And for me, education about what we're doing is key, and certainly for the younger generations, is where we need to be starting, because you need to start from the bottom and work up. One of the big things, takeaway messages from Groundswell, when Bertie kindly took me down for the first time 3-4 years ago, was the age of the people that were there. It was a huge shocker for me. Normally you go to a farming event and it's the average age is 50 and above. But going there, we had young people, we had a mix of genders, we had a mix of jobs and mix of nationalities. It was that's why it was such a big eye-opener to me to think, well, actually, it's not just the smaller scale that it's attracting here. It is a worldwide mix of youth that's coming into this, which was really a big positive message that I took away from that, and sort of invigorating to come away thinking actually there is a bit of hope out there in the dark times, which it was back then. So
do you think we can still call ourselves youth, Hugh?
Luckily this is an audio, not a video blog, because clearly not a youth anymore.
But you're right, though, the average age of a Scottish farmer is on the older end. I don't know what it is now. It used to be in their 70s, and I guess for going back to students going to college to come home, potentially to a farm with a grandfather and a father still in place with their views on how things were done, it can be hard for someone younger to have been taught something at college to then bring back. And Hugh, you've touched on it a few times, just how long it takes for changes to take effect in agriculture, because you're planning minimum 5 years' time, more like 10 years' time if you're trying to change livestock systems, because it just takes such a long time for changes to come through in young stock. So it is refreshing to see young people attending these events and changing attitudes. But it's important that we all keep learning, no matter what our age, and being open to new ideas. So just to come to a close then, Laura, how do you feel farming operations and the biodiversity goals work together rather than competing with each other?
Well, one thing that we say is that we're trying to farm in harmony with nature rather than against her. So we're planning our grazing plan and all around sort of either the capacity of the soils, the type of ground that they're on, but also the shelter that they've got. We're watching the stock all the time to see where we might have issues, and we want to change the location of lambing for the following year, for example. So I think we're just trying very hard to take the time to look at what's happening on the ground and think if something isn't working, is there a different way to do it without necessarily going straight to a cost of an input or another sort of fix.
And Hugh, with your farm manager hat on, what would success look like for you in 10 or 20 years' time on the estate?
I think success would be physically seeing the vision of, like Laura said, that the farming working in harmony with nature, having a herd which is actively succeeding outside. We want to be carving outside, which is a long-term goal. I want to see more biodiversity through the estate. I want to see, in an ideal world, perfect infrastructure. So it basically makes you can maximize your moves. For me, it's having that profitable business, which is working with nature. I want to see the soil health increasing through all our monitoring programs. I want to see the herd just actively succeeding, as with the sheep, alongside the cows. And yeah, a great place to work. Just having this vision of Atholl Estates, which is a vision of regenerative agriculture. I think that's the only way I can sort of describe it. It's a difficult one, that one, certainly for farmers, because I think you often think about the today or the tomorrow, but it's the planning well in the future is very difficult when you're trying to react to what's happening on the ground today. So, but for me, I just want the whole system working as one. That would be key for me.
Yeah, Hugh touched on it there. I was just going to mention the people aspects of it as well. We've got a strong farm team, a strong rural team, and it was a big transition to the regen system. But the farm had been organic in the past, so a lot of those organic principles were kind of embedded in the team. So everyone's done a great job of kind of pulling together and seeing the vision come into reality. So in that sort of 10, 20-year time vision, to think that we've still got happy team, healthy people, that we're putting healthy, sustainable meats into the food chain as well. That's also a fantastic sort of goal to have.
Absolutely. And I think that's the sort of third pillar of sustainability that we're talking about. And that's the social stability. And, you know, that starts with your own workforce and ensuring that everybody is on board with what you're doing and you're all working towards the same goal, because that makes it a rewarding job for everybody. And finally, coming to you, Bertie, as trustee and, you know, with your role of trustee and owner and, you know, potentially guardian of the land for future generations, what does success look like for you?
To increase the biodiversity within the landscape, maintain the housing stock so you can maintain a kind of fun community that live here and work here, keep the place alive. I mean, I think a lot of Highland communities are under real pressures of depopulation and housing problems, and, you know, it's hard to break even in farming and it's hard in, you know, rural business life. And I think often, you know, people in rural communities feel that that their problems and their lifestyles aren't really understood in the corridors of power. So it's continuing to champion our community here, the nature that we've got, and the hills that we live in, because it's such a wonderful place to live, but it's not always easy. So we've always got to be planning for the future and making the place a nice place to be. If that doesn't sound too kind of wishy-washy.
Not at all. It sounds like a very aspirational, lovely, you know, way to end the podcast, because ultimately we all want a thriving agriculture community and the people that are involved with that. And that sounds like it's of great importance to you all on the estate. And I can just hear from speaking to you how well you all work together with this shared goal of a sustainable, regenerative estate that, you know, supports the local community. And I think it's fantastic what you're doing. You know, any big change to a business can be a shock to the people working in it and the land, you know, trying to change something so drastically. And I think you mentioned at the start, just starting small, trying a few things and seeing how you go. So I just want to say a big thank you to you all for joining me today. And it's been really interesting to get an insight into the work that you're all doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary-Jane.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Agri Culture. If you'd like to find out more about Atholl Estates, you can find links in the show notes. If you're interested in regenerative farming practices, you may also want to listen to the Farm Advisory Service Natural Capital podcast. This episode was presented by me, Mary-Jane Lawrie, produced by Kerry Hammond, and edited by Chamerlain in association with the Scottish Government.
The Farm Advisory Service podcast. Audio advice on livestock, crops and soils, environment, rural business and more. Brought to you in association with the Scottish Government.